Right. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to our event this morning on bringing health into sustainable mobility. This is a debate that we're lucky to be joined with today by some of the people who it's like having a flashback for me. 20 odd years ago or more, I was heavily involved with this topic when I worked for the European Federation for Transport and Environment. I was a co-chair for a joint WHO, UNECE, OECD conference for the civil society part of the conference in London in '99. And we're lucky to have that first contribution today from someone who was working with the WHO at that time, helping to provide the health component of that conference. So it feels like a rebirth, a revisit to a former life for me. And the whole point about today is, unfortunately, over that intervening period, not much has progressed. There have been changes, there have been developments. We've got a better understanding of all of the interlinkages. And so today we will split our topics and our talk to two parts: understanding those interlinkages, and then how do we progress, how do we get policy movement, change, and real progress. So I'm Fraser Goodwin. I'm the advocacy coordinator with the European Public Health Alliance. We're the host for today, but we have a great range of speakers, a great range of contributors, and we're also very, very fortunate to have a fantastic moderator with us today. And that moderator is Pedro Gomez from Polis. And I now hand over the microphone and the floor to Pedro.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Pedro Gomes. I work at Polis Network, the network of cities and regions for transport innovation. I coordinate the cluster, the clean vehicles and air quality, so everything related to zero-emission vehicles, air pollution. And sometimes in my work, what I feel is that, and this is why for me this event is quite interesting, that when we try to tackle the health impacts of air pollution, for example, from transport, it's very much connected to technology. We talk about zero-emission vehicles, connected mobility, autonomous mobility, and sometimes we forget that what's important here is people and the public health. So I'm quite happy to be here, to be part of this session, to maybe reconnect a bit on what is really important when we talk about sustainable mobility. And I'm really looking forward for the discussion, for the inspiring presentations, and to spend a really interesting morning with you all. Without further ado, I will give now the floor to the first speaker of the day, Francesca Raccioppi. She's the head of office of the WHO European Center for Environmental and Health, and she's going to do the opening keynote before joining the first panel. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and thanks a lot, Fraser, for inviting me today. As you know, you say a long time has gone by. If I think back, well, you know, quite a lot has happened. We know much more, much better, but what is most important, we have much more science behind what 30 years ago were kind of intuitions. And this is on what we need to rely on. May I have the slides, please? So the next one. The next one, please. Yeah. So if you are here, is probably because regardless of your motivation, whether you are coming from an urban planning perspective, whether you are coming from an environmentalist perspective or a health perspective, at the end of the day, what you would like to do is to achieve this kind of shift. What we are trying to do here and what we have been trying to do for the past quarter of a century, if not more, has been to invert the pyramid and to make, you know, and to get more of the green at the, as the heart and less of the red polluting, the kind of stuff that we don't like towards the bottom. But it is a difficult shift to make because still today are a lot of environmental effects on health, which are mediated one way or the other by transport. think of air pollution. 560,000 people dying every year in Europe. And when I speak of Europe, sorry, for the WHO, it is 53 member states, 900 million of people. So we cover EU and beyond. So more than 500,000 of deaths attributable to air pollution, outdoor air pollution. Now, not all of it will be, related to transport, but a big chunk of it, particularly in urban areas, comes from that. Next to that, still 65,000 dying on our roads because of road traffic injuries. It's half what I was telling you 30 years ago, so big improvement, but still there is no other cause of death worse than road traffic injuries for people between the age of 5 and 29. So if any one of us doesn't make into adulthood, the most likely cause is because of a road traffic accident. Stark numbers. And now some new statistics are kicking because we are now quantifying better and more the effects of climate change. Last summer, we have had 62,000 deaths during the summer of 2022 attributable to heat waves. Now we can say, what has heat wave to do with urban transport? Well, it has to do because what we needed to understand is that these policies are all connected. They are all coming together. Many of the policies that we are applying to reduce air pollution, I say many, not all, because there are egregious examples that it does not work, are able to address climate change and at the same time air pollution. So from a public health perspective, we are strongly advocating improving air pollution, including in urban areas, because it is what we call a co-benefit kind of policy. So we serve a double agenda. The beauty of it, and this is why we are trying to convince a policymaker to act on that, right away, is that while, the effects of a policy that aims to stabilize climate will be seen perhaps in 20, 30 years' time, the effects of reducing air pollution are seen immediately. So if you are a policymaker or if you are working with the policymakers, tell them this important message. If we improve air pollution, we make a benefit for the future and for now. And this is 500,000 deaths a year that we want to address. So this is why at the WHO we were so excited that the European Commission has embarked into a process of revision of the Air Quality Directive that will take us closer to the WHO Air Quality Guidelines. And then, and this is the key trigger for us here, there is the issue of non-communicable diseases, the greatest killer of all in Europe. More than 90% of people, when, those who made it into their 30s and above, when we die, 90% of the time will be because of the effects of NCD. So, NCDs are non-communicable diseases, are related a lot to something as simple as physical activity. We know from the latest evidence that more than 1 in 3 Europeans is not sufficiently physical activity. And before this conference, I was checking the Eurobarometer, and the latest Eurobarometer on sport tells you that 40% of people who answer the question, why is it that you are not doing more physical activity or sports, they say, I have no time. So, from a public health perspective, we have always looked at the physical activity through active mobility as a golden key to help us addressing this problem. But these arguments have been around for quite a long time. We now have, and I am sure that Audrey later on will speak about that, we have a beautiful, compelling evidence that tells us that if we were meeting WHO guidelines for physical activity, we would reduce total mortality by approximately 10%. There is no other kind of intervention that can deliver this benefit. And this is the reason why, even if we count in the negative effects of being exposed to air pollution while we walk or cycle, or to the risk of injuries, the benefits greatly outweighs the risks. And again, this is another super important message for us to give to the policymakers, because we must tell them, you will always be on the right side by promoting well, and I underline 5 times well, active transportation. Now, things have been moving a little by little, but more and more cities have been transforming. Brussels, Boulevard and Spark. Paris, is you cannot, recognize Paris compared to how it was 10 years ago. So many great places are changing. What have been some of the key triggers, particularly now that we are moving forward with the transport policies? I think of 3 of them. One is COVID. This has been a dramatic game changer. It seems so strange to speak about a tragedy that wiped away 2.5 million lives from Europe as like something that was a game changer for urban mobility and urban planning. But this is a reality. And this is because we couldn't come in touch, in proximity with each other. And then active mobility became a lifesaver. We could, we couldn't go to the gym, but we could still walk, perhaps the dog around the block, or, to deposit our garbage. We couldn't travel to, commute to work, but we were still able to visit local shops and local places. And cycling and walking became all of a sudden important. They also became all of a sudden feasible, because cars had been largely removed. And this has created a short-lived but important space and opportunity for people to experiment. How many people had never tried to ride a bike on the streets of their city, and they did it? Why? Because also authorities, we were so much afraid of getting hospitals flooded. The only thing we could do at that time was to treat the COVID, nothing else. How many people had to wait years to get a normal operation? So our first priority was, don't get into our hospitals more people who are suffering from injuries. Let's make it safe. There was a huge push in that direction to preserve health systems to be functional, able to give their attention to those who needed them. So a few years later, the picture is how much are we still there? Well, in some places, the gain has been put to fruition, so the change has stayed. In other places, not so much. There has been reverting back. But there have been new instruments. A huge amount of funds have become available because of the recovery funds. More recently, and 2 years ago, for energy reasons, because of the Repower Europe, for example. So we have a new entry points from a financial point of view, and we have a new entry points from a, how should I say, a thinking and planning our urban space. Just to think the beauty of this concept of the cities of proximity. Professor Carlos Moreno is a genius from this point of view. It's a beautiful concept. And it is not what we hear from some conservative, hardline conservative, an attempt to lock everybody where they stand, to repress freedom. It's the right opposite. It's just the opposite. We want to give people the freedom of having access to what they need and to beautiful environments where they can live and thrive without being dependent on owning or accessing a car. It's a completely different concept. The second game changer, has been electric bicycles. Wonderful. From a health perspective, we welcome this because, of course, this allows people to stay physically active longer in their lives. It has been lowering the barrier of access to cycling to many people, making cycling feasible also in places where it were, some hilly situations. So from this point of view, it's an excellent development, and it has been booming. There has been also because there have been government incentives to that. But of course, we have also to be careful there because electric bicycles and together with micromobility, they pose new challenges. And because they are exploding in cities, they are moving at a pace that is faster than our ability to manage. So this is really a red, triangle where we have to be very careful. But there is a huge opportunity there. The third point is climate, the climate agenda. The climate agenda has been relatively peripheral to active mobility. And it has been mostly because we didn't have enough science behind it. But it is thanks to research that now we know and we can quantify that the shift from cars to cycling or walking. Cycling is a great example. Even once, if 1 in 5 people in Europe would stop driving a car and shifting to bicycles, we would have 8%, I repeat, 8% of reduction in carbon emissions in cities. Again, huge. So we needed to start thinking of active mobility not as a fringe to the climate agenda, but as a central to the climate agenda, particularly in cities. I'm going to finish this introduction. I'm sure that we will have a lot more to say later on, and with so many colleagues who will bring examples, by saying it's a time to be optimists. It's a time to be optimists. For the first time, and it took what? Again, Fraser, I'm looking at you, 30 years, something like that, for the European Union to come, on the threshold. It's not yet there. Every month we have a new step that is taking us closer to an EU strategy. And, from the transport, environment and health point of view, within the United Nations system, WHO and the European Commission for Europe are working with the member states to implement a pan-European program, plan of action on cycling, and a new one also on walking. So we have important reasons to be optimistic here. I think we need to use all these new arguments and to learn how to build them. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if this will happen because of climate change. It will happen because of health or environment. What is important is that it will happen. And I'm sure this will be the way forward. Thank you very much. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. I try also to be optimistic. There's some political, let's say, clouds in the horizon. But I was listening to you and I was thinking that today I came by bike. I have an electric bike and it's indeed a game changer. Although my colleagues that have regular bikes say that I cheat, but I say for a city like Brussels, it's really useful. My only concern is that I was going down Avenue Louise, and I don't know exactly if the benefits of cycling are more than the impact of all the cars next to me polluting and passing by. So I don't know which one is it's the best, but still I'm not going to revert to old habits. So I'm still going to use the bike, and I feel that Brussels. When I arrived here, people say, Brussels is a city for cars. I see things changing. So they are leading the way in this change, but other cities are doing the same. I'm going to invite you now for the first panel, and also Pierre and Audrey. She will join us online. So already presented Francesca. So if you may sit here, Pierre Dornier is the founder and director of the organization Les Chercheurs Terre, who are based here in Brussels. And Audrey Denazel, she is senior lecturer at the Center of Environmental Policy, co-chair of the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology Policy Committee, and outgoing chair and founder of Imperial College's Network of Excellence in Air Quality. Thanks for joining us online. I hope you can hear us, and perfect. So I don't want to make this a panel, a very formal panel with strict presentations. I just want to make this more of a conversation. So I'm going to ask each one of you an impact statement on why this topic of making the links between transport, environment, and health is important. Fraser already mentioned why it is, but I also wanted to hear from you. Since Francesca, you started, with the keynote. I'm going to change this a bit and maybe give the floor first to Audrey, and then to give you some rest. I think it's more than fair. But if you can give like 5 minutes introduction of why this topic is important for you, and then we can continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry I couldn't join you in person. It's a shame, but that's life. And it was an honor to follow up after Francesca's fantastic talk, and of course a lot of what I will say resonates with what she has been talking about. And Francesca and I also go a long way, and we've been collaborating for a long time on this. So the main point I want to make right now is how I think we've tended to forget the ultimate goal of many of our policies, whether it's environmental policies or urban policies, particularly to tackle air pollution or climate change. We tend to have very siloed approaches to reaching those targets on those individual departments without thinking about ultimately what it is that we're trying to achieve. And I think we might all agree that, and if you ask a bunch of stakeholders, as we just did actually in a structured decision-making workshop that we conducted yesterday, if you ask a bunch of stakeholders, ultimately, no matter what their background is, what is it that they're trying to achieve, and you really dig in and to find out what is the ultimate goal, it's typically promoting health and equity. But in the way we decide our policies, we tend to forget that that's what we're trying to achieve, is to promote health and equity. So why does this matter? Because, as I said, we take siloed approaches in different departments. So when we're trying to develop air pollution or climate change policies, what do we typically talk about? What you mentioned a bit earlier, Pedro, which is we try to develop mostly technological solutions. So the most talked about and discussed and implemented type of policies tend to be electrifying the vehicle fleet. And I don't want to say that electrifying the vehicle fleet is not important. Of course, it's part of the mix. But when we have very siloed approaches and only think about that, we miss out on much greater opportunities. So yes, electric vehicle fleets will help us achieve air pollution and climate change targets, but it will miss the mark when it comes to actually promoting health in a much more holistic and ambitious way. So to take an example, I've developed a lot of health impact assessment models, as Francesca was alluding to. And as part of this, I've compared, and other colleagues have as well, what might be some of the outcomes of health for health when you put in place more technological policies, such as electrifying the vehicle fleets, or when you look at policies that promote modal shifts, so shifting from driving to walking, cycling, and public transport. And of course, both of these achieve very important climate change and air pollution targets. But what you get in addition with the modal shift policy, with the behavioral scenarios, is you get, as Francesca mentioned, the very prominent health determinant, which is physical activity. You can also have opportunities to create more space in cities for green space, and green space has multiple health benefits, whether it's through exposure to green space or exposure to biodiversity. It also has heat reduction. So in the context of climate change, it brings resilience, flood control, social interactions, public spaces. We can also reduce noise by shifting people away from cars, and the list goes on. So when we think big picture, holistically, or in the systems, we see that more behavioral solutions are much more attractive. So if you think about, if we decide on our policies by taking that more systemic approach, we'll find that, for example, comparing the electric vehicles versus behavioral shifts, we can find between 5 and 20 times the health benefits from the promotion of walking, cycling, and public transport. So that's to give you one example of how we can identify and quantify why is it that it makes sense to think in systems. I also want to give another example, which is a project that I just completed with some colleagues for the European Public Health Alliance, which was to analyze the sustainable urban mobility plans in European cities. And what we found, we tried to understand how much health, what the prominence of health in those urban sustainable urban mobility plans were. And we found that although health was mentioned, it was really, they really missed the mark. They really is a missed opportunity to promote health much more strongly. Even though walking and cycling is mentioned in most sustainable mobility plans, the health impacts are not prominent at all in most sustainable urban mobility plans across Europe. So the pathways to health are not discussed, and the motivation to promote walking, cycling, public transport is not linked to health, and that's a missed opportunity. Why? Because health can be a glue in a way to rally up together stakeholders from all walks of life, different departments. So if we bring together people with a common vision, we're much more likely to be able to create a positive vision and more ambitious implementation of policies. So health can be what brings everybody together. Everybody needs a different hook. Different departments, different sectors, different stakeholders need something different to be able to engage in what is often seen as difficult change. But in fact, it doesn't have to be difficult change. If you think about it, of the positive benefits of transformation in our cities, so that as is being done, for example, in Paris, in Oslo, in particular, but to a minor extent in other cities as well. If we can embrace that positive vision, we're much more and demonstrate how we can have benefits for all of us in all kinds of different ways. I think we're much more likely to engage people in this transformation. So that's my main message. I think we need to think in systems, think holistically, and think of ultimately what is it that we're trying to achieve, rather than work in our silos and just want to reach one little target. That's yes, of course, important, but bringing everybody together with that positive vision is going to help us create much more ambitious change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Very, very inspiring words. And I take one thing from your initial statement, which for me is quite important, coming from a network of cities, is you mentioned the vision. It's important to have a vision, and it's important to have the courage to implement that vision. And we see that some of the cities that you mentioned, they implemented it. They changed radically what they are now. I just want more cities to follow up, including my own. I'm from Lisbon. I wish Lisbon was a bit better in some aspects. They are slowly improving, but there's still a long way to go. Thank you so much. I'm now going to give the floor to Kev to talk a little bit more about your work, and feel free to share your experience and what you do.
Is it working? Yes. Yeah, there are good things in Brussels as well, not only in Paris, and of a rather good low emission zone that I think we should protect. No, it's very interesting. I think I would add a bit of maybe a debate or a discussion ingredients to what you've just said. Health is, of course, very important. I think that's the main reason why we are all here and doing what we're doing. But I think that for most people, the main concern is not whether urban planning projects is going to improve their health. The main concern is whether such project is going to impact their daily life. And I think this is very important to bear in mind. If, for example, I want to get rid of car parking spaces on the street, because at the end of the day, it's going to improve air quality and as a result, health. If I just do that, for sure, all local residents are going to say, yeah, but now I can't, park my car right in front of my home. This is crap. And that's probably all we're going to hear. I might have a few allies who say, yeah, it's good for health, it's good for the environment, but they won't be very audible. Whereas if I say, I want to get rid of car parking spaces on the streets, I know that it's to improve air quality and to improve health. But I also say, we're going to replace them with cycle racks so that you don't have to store your bike in your living room anymore. We're going to replace them with trees so that the next heat wave is going to be less painful. We're going to replace them with a shelter in front of the school so that parents don't have to, you know, they can wait for their kids in the dry when it's raining. Or we're going to allow this restaurant or this cafe to extend the terrace so that it has more clients, or you can have a coffee or a beer, whatever, in the sun when it's sunny. This way, so I have more allies. My allies will be more motivated to defend my project, and they'll have better arguments. And this way, I will discredit as well the opponents, or at least the arguments. So I completely agree with you, Audrey. I think you know, the health objective is of course a essential one, and I think is a very good glue, as you said. But I also think that it doesn't necessarily, or this message doesn't necessarily work for everybody, and yeah, you have to adapt a little bit your strategy around that, bearing that in mind, basically. Does it answer the
Oh, definitely.
the general question?
Can you talk to us a bit more about the initiatives that you've been implementing, the school streets and other projects, because I think they are quite interesting also.
Yeah, is it possible to show the slide? Or I quite like it, I have to say. But so yeah, basically we're working on several campaigns to improve air quality in Brussels. So the low emission zone, I don't know how familiar you are with this. So basically phasing out old cars from cities, low traffic neighborhoods. Basically, when you reduce or you prioritize active and shared mobility in districts. And yeah, also school street. So school street is a street that is closed in front of a school to road traffic. We know for sure that it improves air quality. We had figures coming from London saying that NO2 concentrations decrease up to 23%. On Friday, we had new figures from Paris saying that it can even go up to 30%. So it really improves air quality, and as a result, it improves, or it protects better children's health, which is key because children are particularly vulnerable to air pollution. And it's a rather positive measure, as I was saying, because I mean, you can be against it. Some people are against it, but it's quite complicated because you would be against protecting children's health. And if you not only, and this links to what I was saying earlier, if you not only close the street, which can seem a bit negative, but you open it to kids and you know, provide them with games. We put a little, well, this is a bit utopic here, but we put a little ice cream. I was about to say food truck, but it's a food bike, I don't know, cargo bike thing, or you know, benches and plants. Trees and plants are also very important for well-being and psychological development. So yeah, this is one of our very big campaign that we're working on in Brussels.
And it's a great way to send the right message. I was recently talking with Pascal Smet, the former minister of the Brussels region government, and we were discussing the Good Move plan. And one of the things that he acknowledged was that the Good Move, the way that it's being branded, that's reduced the number of cars, creates a very strong response from the people, because you are taking away our freedom to move around. And instead, the message should be, we are not taking away your cars, we are giving more space to your children, we are giving healthier places for your grandparents, so we are creating a better city. So the focus should be indeed on this, because I think there's more buy-in from people if you send the right message. But it's still a learning process. I think it's a trial and error, let's say, from the policymakers' point of view, and also from our side of the equation. But Francesca, if you want to add something to this discussion.
Can you hear me? Well, following what we heard from Audrey and Daniel, I'm changing completely what I was, going to say, because this is so compelling what you are saying. I'm going to share with you something somewhat personal. Before joining the World Health Organization, so promotion of public health is key, I used to work in the corporate sector. And there I became very familiar with marketing and advertising and how you develop a campaign. Now, Have you ever seen a car being sold because its engine is of a certain type and because it has such an issue? You never see that. A car is sold because it appeals to other pulsions, other needs of us as human beings, other needs. So making the transition from the private business sector to the public health sector at the international level, what surprised me was can I say, I hope I'm not going to offend anyone here, the naivety of much of our community in health promotion. It is so naive. You think that, wow, this is a huge health impact. Look at my presentation before. It was to some extent using that kind of rhetoric. 500,000 people dying because of air pollution. Terrible, terrible. Who is the culprit? Well, transport has a role into that. And physical activity is good. You can do that. We can have the shift. So now, the paradigm that works there, I tell you what is the problem. I tell you what is the solution. And because you are a rational well-being, I expect that you will embrace that solution and comply. No? We tell people don't smoke because you get cancer. Who has ever been smoking? I mean, the reason why people smoking are completely different is because you need a gesture, you need to assert yourself. So there is so much naivety in our community that when I listen to you, I think like, well, we really need more of these brilliant people who develop advertising for luxury goods, for cars, for iPhones, for whatever, to come and become, our allies. Of course, it costs a fortune to hire, one of them. But, perhaps this is the direction. We shouldn't, we should really reframe the discourse. Because as you rightly say, if you start your thinking, you know what, from next month, we will be closing this street and get rid of 300 cars from here. Of course, yeah, what do you expect? People being happy. Is there anyone from Barcelona here? I think that the super blocks, Audrey, you are familiar with the super blocks in Barcelona. They have not been a walk in the woods. But yet, once the things have been in place, once people started seeing that, then you start designing that. So my reflection, it is a kind of self-criticism to ask, is how can we build much stronger, much better arguments? Because at the end of the day, we need the science. We must have it. We need to be able to prove that, like in your case, if you would be a regular scientist, even if you are exposed to a little bit of the pollution coming from there, you are still better off keeping cycling than not. Okay, Pedro? Trust us, trust Audrey, trust me.
I do.
But really, how can we reframe this in such a way that at the end of the day, what we want is to be happy in our cities. It is about emotions. And the cities that have managed to get through this transformation are cities where everybody wants to go. I've been living 8 years in Copenhagen. It's a fantastic city, fantastic city. And you love it. People use the outdoor space as if it were their living room. Unbelievable for a city where most of the half of the year it is dark, cold, windy, and rainy. Think of what we can do in the rest of Europe, and they made this a transformation, and it is to a large extent driven by emotions, your happiness, your lifestyle, and the enjoyment of that. We are very afraid of saying we want to be happy, and we can be happy. It doesn't belong to my vocabulary as an environmental epidemiologist. I believe that. But at the end of the day, it is just about this street that you have shown. It's beautiful, it's inspiring. I want to take Leonardo and play there, And it doesn't. I don't need to know that the air there will be 10 micrograms, of PM 2.5 less. Doesn't matter. I'll be happy, and this is what counts. So we must become much more sophisticated and much braver and much, stronger into selling and being able to have this vision. And the vision comes, crushing all the borders and the silos, exactly what Audrey was telling us at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've never been to Copenhagen, but I was recently in Oslo. And it's another example of a city, almost no cars. Most of them are electric. It's really, really quiet when it comes to noise, even a bit too much for a Southern European like me. So from the first impact, it's like, okay, this is too quiet. Nothing. But us, after you get used to it, is really amazing. It's so different. Like coming back to the COVID days where I could hear the birds in my window. But you also mentioned something quite important, which is the emotion and the happiness. And I wanted to ask to Audrey, because we've been seeing a lot of backlash for measures, school streets. But for example, we had recently a working meeting of always on the active travel, and we discussed the Oxford low traffic neighborhoods and how it's becoming a political battleground. So people believe in conspiracy theories. They say they are trying to keep them within some boundaries. I've been having huge discussions with friends on WhatsApp groups, including a good friend of mine, which was actually an environmental engineer like me. He now fall into that trap. He believes on these conspiracy theories. So I had to stop talking with him because there's no way that you can convince someone like that. But I wanted to ask Audrey, based on your work and your evidence, how can you support policymakers that have to deal with this kind of backlash? You also see London, for example, the mayor of London. He won the election, but he was suffering death threats. So this is kind of concerning for a policymaker. No one wants to be killed, I would say. No one wants to be the bad guy. And it's really hard after these ideas are spread throughout the population. It's really hard to change them. So how can we use the evidence-based work that you do to support the policymakers? If there's a solution, why not be?
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I mean that's a really important point, and it goes back to the same things as Pierre and Francesca were saying, and that I fully agree with. It's really about how you engage people and give different hooks to people, and you have to be in there first. So of course, and I guess that's what I was, and I'm very thankful for Pierre to bring this up, because clearly I misrepresented what I was trying to say. And in fact, when I give presentations, I give very similar images to what Pierre had showed us, but real pictures usually. And absolutely, we need to think of all the different hooks, the different things that are going to convince people. And we need to engage people early on and demonstrate to them, it's not a sacrifice. This is what you get out of this, is a city that is worth staying in, living for, and not some place that you want to escape at the minute you have a 3-day weekend. So I think it's engaging people early on with that positive vision and finding all the different things that are going to be more talkative to people, that are going to speak more to their hearts, to their emotions, and also to their brains. I mean, we all struggle with our weight. We've developed some research that shows that when you bike, you decrease your body mass index, while as other modes of transportation increase their body mass index. When you walk or bike, you reduce your stress. Everybody thinks that living in a city is stressful, but actually walking and cycling both statistically significantly reduce stress compared to any other activity, whereas driving increases your level of stress. So it's finding those different hooks and creating that vision. This is the city you could be living in. It's not a sacrifice. It's something to look forward to. But I think in terms of how you engage, how you combat the misinformation, the conspiracy theory. So what happens with misinformation, and I've done some research demonstrating that when it comes to low traffic neighborhoods in the UK, there's a huge amount of misinformation in media. And it's not just in the Daily Mail. It's also in the Guardian. So those Daily Mail is what you would expect, to find sensational news articles that portray anything that touches the car as being terribly negative. But the Guardian is seen as some more of a central left kind of a newspaper. But all of these newspapers portray to a certain extent some misinformation. And that the misinformation gets picked up by the social media and gets amplified. So the important thing when it comes to misinformation is really getting in on it early. So do a lot of work engaging with people early on before, because the first piece of information that somebody receives is what they will cling to. That's their anchor. It's much harder to change people's minds once they've heard the news from somewhere than to be the first one in there saying, okay, this is the evidence. So I think doing a lot more, working a lot more on engaging people with the evidence base, on the benefits, on the trade-offs, being transparent about it early on in the process is important. But we also need to realize that any change is going to be controversial. People don't like change. So two things. One, there's often just a very few minority of people who are very vocal, and they tend to drive the debate and make change controversial. And they don't necessarily reflect the silent majority, which is often actually less against change. But to make things happen, we know there's going to be a storm, so you have to test things out. You have to trial it. One of you was saying, and I can't remember who, that just really implementing, trying things out, giving a taste to people, because once, I think it's Francesca, once things are implemented, people actually like it. But that process of trying to implement things is what's controversial. So sometimes we need to frame things as, we're just going to try this out as a test and then see what happens. And then when people see the change and live in it, that's when they start loving the change. So I think we need to one, be engaged very early on, not let the misinformation kick in, be the first to provide the information. Also realize that a lot of the controversy is noise, and in fact, when we look at the election results in London, the candidates that were against low traffic neighborhoods were not the ones typically that were elected, quite the contrary. So it's not true that it's popular. And then when you look at the social media groups, the groups that are against low traffic neighborhoods, for example, are much more vocal and tweet a lot more. But the constituency of the pro low traffic neighborhoods, the ones that are for it, there are more people in those groups. They just don't go out and shout. They just are in favor. So we need to be brave and trust also that that the public opinion is not necessarily always against it. We need to come in early and provide some evidence base and some visioning for people to embrace it. And we need to have the guts to try things out and frame it as an experiment if it's too difficult to implement as a final as a final policy, because once people live it, they love it. Hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Audrey. And actually it reminds me a bit of my previous work at the city, where we used to have these meetings, city council meetings about, for example, reducing traffic in the main artery road. And usually it was the same three people that were there, very vocal, very against. Say, you are going to kill the business. And actually the mayor started listening to those people. And cars out, actually the shops become much more profitable.
Exactly, time and again, it's usually the local commerce that's very vocal against any kind of change that touches people's driving habits. But time and again, we find that actually the commerce improves. Of course, there's some that don't work as well. There's the few exceptions, but most commerce actually improves when places become more walkable and bikeable.
Indeed, and speaking of support, you do have numbers. For example, you did a study that shows support. I'm sorry, the microphone. You did have the study, or you should share with me some numbers on how there's public support to the Good Move plan. So this silent majority, let's say, is actually for this change. But how do you deal with the vocal minority? So when you implement these kinds of projects, do you deal with the local minority against it? What strategies do you use if you have to deal with them?
So yeah, at the beginning of this year, we published a survey. We basically asked people in Brussels. It was a representative sample series survey. I prefer to specify that because that's always the first counter argument. would you support the creation of car-free zones in front of schools in Brussels? And 73% of people said yes, including car drivers, including people without kids. So a vast majority of people, on the paper at least, are supporting basically school streets or ideal school streets. Of course, we have openness. I call them trolls. They're trolls. And on social media, you were talking about this meeting with, but then also, it doesn't matter what you say. They're always saying, this is bullshit, you like green terrorists, I don't know what. So then, I mean, well, these people I don't pay attention to anymore because I think it's just a waste of time and energy. I way prefer to focus my efforts on, as I said earlier, activating allies, because they're the people who will, I think, help you the most to move the lines. And convincing people who are on the fence, because some people, and I understand. I mean, if you are a shop owner, you started your business and it's not working very well, and suddenly someone says you, well, we're going to close the street, and you think that most of your clients come with a car. Of course, you're scared. I mean, you know, it might just kill your business. So for these people, I think it's very important to spend time and to explain, well, actually, did you know that most of your clients are coming by bike or, you know, walking, and car drivers are a minority. And actually, have you seen what happened in the pedestrian zone in Brussels? It's working well, and but for the minority, I mean, yeah, maybe it's a mistake by I stopped paying, unless they really manage to get into the media and get like a lot of attention. But then, yeah, okay, we might react and you know, have a strategy for that, which we do now and again. But otherwise, yeah, we don't spend.
Yeah, but you mentioned a really interesting point, which is the perceptions. So as part of a previous project where I was involved, we asked the shopkeepers, how do you think? So first of all, how do you come to your shop? And how do you think your customers come? And they think the customers come like them by car. And then we show them actually the numbers of how customers come to the shop, and it was like 50% come by walking, or maybe public transport. The majority is walking because the commerce is mostly local. And they were quite surprised, because then they say, why are we promoting cars if people don't? Because they say, but a car driver buys more. Yes, but buys less time, it's less frequent. So in the end of the year, people that go there all day, every day, shopping small quantities, in the end, they spend more money.
Yeah, and on this point, I mean, it's not really the topic, I guess, of the discussion, but just for clarification, the real killer is online business, you know, like buying online or buying in malls, you know, like the big commercial centers. This is what's killing local businesses. It's not pedestrian area. So, but anyway, yeah, I think it's important to spend time to try to explain, to reassure them, to ask other businesses. For example, in Barcelona, I mean, I've seen a lot of interviews of local businesses that were scared at the beginning, and now they are in the super block, as you were mentioning, and they're like, yeah, she's a lot better because it's quieter. We have more. In Paris as well, school streets, you know, completely closed to road traffic. But I think it's also important to have a plan B. If it doesn't work well, okay, maybe we can give some money or something so that you're not a collateral victim of our, you know, revamping the city. I think you also need some very practical solutions or answers.
Thank you. I would like now to give the floor to the audience if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. The only thing I ask of you is please say your name and where you come from. If you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to do so. Don't be shy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the discussion. It was very profitable. And so I have just a couple of questions, actually. My name is Pietro Forghieri. I come from Italy and from the International Society of Doctors for the Environment, EPHA member, of course. So in Italy, we are having big issues with the Salvini law that is going in the parliament. Is under discussion, and it's going to be probably it's going to be actually a real thing in the near future. So it involves, of course, transportation in cities and a lot of other related issues. So my question is, how to engage the conversation with the community without sounding like that we come from a political side, like from that radical, chic, lefty, poshy political side, because it is something that is like against the. It is an argument that frequently in Italy, the more conservative side is bringing into discussion, and you know, I don't really get how to be progressive without going against the conservative ones, but we don't want to work against. We want to work together. So maybe I don't know. Maybe in Barcelona or in other places, are there any members from the community that they went through personal changement and that they can maybe advocate and tell their own experience, and then maybe we can bring their own experience and bring it to Italy in order to, I don't know, share the experience and make something similar. I'm thinking about people who run activities in places like the Barcelona, what? Yes, exactly. Because usually people from the conservative side in Italy, they are people that are business leaders, and so I don't know if I was clear enough. Maybe I can sum it up. So how can we engage the people who are voting from the conservative side because they against the environmental policies in cities because they fear they will not get they will get less profit with the new if the new policies get implemented in cities? This is the question.
Before I give the floor to the speakers, I have to say that unfortunately this is not just a problem in Italy.
Okay.
It's in very growing number of European countries. I don't know if someone wants.
I'd be happy to answer if is that okay? There we go.
Go ahead.
Thank you. It's a fantastic question, and I think there are two things that I want to answer to that. One is in places like Barcelona and in Paris, it was of course left-wing governments that put in place the more ambitious policy that were there. In the case of Barcelona, though, the political tide changed. And the first reaction of the new mayor was to actually stop all the progression on the superblock because that had been an election point. But in fact, because they were quite popular, he couldn't really completely go back. So he called it something different, Ejes Verdes, Green Axis, and continued developing it under a different kind of a name because people actually didn't like it. So just that's and in Paris, you know, people, of course, the conservatives who were against the implementation and fought highly against all the things that the mayor Anne Hidalgo left wing had done. Once it was implemented and people loved it, they had to say, well, of course this had to happen. It's just the way that it was done that's problematic, not the actual policy. So that, you know, that's just to put things in perspective. But I think one way of dealing with that is to try and bring academics on your side, because still, I mean, not entirely, and maybe Italy is different, but academics tend to have a bit of an aura of credibility usually. And so, and the evidence base is quite clear. So if you can demonstrate with strong, transparent, robust evidence base of the multiple types of impacts of different policies, I think you're more likely to engage people with that transparent, trustworthy. You have to create that trust. I fully agree. It's important that people are provided with information that they will trust. And so if you bring a messenger that they trust, and academics can be that, I would think that would help this. But I'm sure Francesca and Pierre will have other fantastic responses to this.
Thank you, Audrey. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
First of all, I have a lot of sympathy, although I've not been living in the country for more than 15 years. I am, I'm very familiar with that kind of issues. I would add to what Audrey has said a couple of additional points. First, there is more and more evidence, but it is not well collected and it is not well advertised about the economic success of well-done pedestrianization schemes. Wherever they have been implemented, it has been a no return because people want them. To the point, then, Audrey, you were bringing up the issue of inequalities, that you may risk end up into gentrification, that you are pushing people out of the city center because now they are so beautiful, so rich, so posh, and only the most affluent can move there. So there is a big misunderstanding there. People will not be poorer, people will be richer, and we must watch out that the benefit spreads around and you don't gentrify. So, and there is evidence there. So let's bring that, make it clearer, particularly where it works. The second point is to be as much as possible on the factual way. I participated in a parliamentary hearing in Italy on this law, and I had my banner with the 30 kilometers per hour on the back, and not because WHO is a leftist organization, but because the laws of the physics tell you that if the energy that is liberated at an impact below 30 kilometers per hour, you stand a certain very high chance of surviving that impact. Above that, no. So we should be much clearer in taking this back to some fundamental choices. First of all, it is not ideological, it is the physics. First. Second, if we are saying that we prioritize speed, let's have whatever speed, we are telling people we don't care about those 10 children, 10 young people, 10 elderly persons that this year in our city died. So one should, it's also what is your responsibility as a policymaker there. And then we also have to say something, and we have also to be humble. We must learn and act upon our mistakes, because we do make mistakes. And we cannot dismiss, the fear of elderly people who have to share a narrow pavement with the riders of a moped. That is a managerial mistake that has been made. So we have to learn from our mistakes, because we cannot afford, these anarchists, or not to govern, not to manage developments, to put at risk the good stuff. And the very last point, the importance of experimenting. There is a beautiful case study. It was from New York. You know that now in New York they have introduced lots of bicycles. It was not easy. They've done a lot of changes. Well, Bloomberg invited the Gale architects, Jan Gale, who is one of the fathers of the pedestrianization of Copenhagen, is a genius about the space for the people, to work in New York and on Times Square, which was like one of the most intractable hotspots of traffic. What they did during the summer, they stopped there and they put for several months some, temporary installations. So they brought in, chairs, umbrellas, things, tables, some flowers that they put around, and they made that there for several weeks. I cannot remember if it was 6 weeks or something like a couple of months. And that helped people to start getting familiar, and it was an experiment, nothing permanent here. So again, learn how to experiment, let the people try. This is why COVID was a little bit of a game changer, because there was a lot of trial there. And some of these things were executed well. others were not. And we must also be honest and quick in correcting when we do know that not everything works well. So we need to be humble, learn from our mistakes and act upon them quickly, because there is a risk of backfiring. And perhaps, for many years, we have been so ignored by the mainstream. Nobody was speaking about this. Now, perhaps the fact that there is this disinformation means that there is something important that is happening. So before, perhaps this field was irrelevant. And perhaps now all this attention, including the negative one, is an indicator that is becoming relevant. So perhaps we should not be so much afraid of this or so much annoyed, but we have to learn, of course, how to contrast and how to counteract and how to beat the disinformation. But perhaps we should also, the Latin people used to say, many enemies, lots of honor. I'm not saying that, but we shouldn't take this seriously, very seriously, because it can fire back. But at the same time, it's a recognition that this is becoming big. And let's hope that it will become bigger.
Thank you. That's also my hope. Any other questions? Yes, from Fraser.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to come back to the contribution from ISDE. And I don't think that there is any one specific answer. You need a whole range of different strategies. The first thing is find champions who are not from the usual suspects. One of the most annoying things as a Brit is the progress that Boris Johnson secured in London. One of the most annoying politicians to come from the UK in a very long time, yet the share bike scheme is still called the Boris bike. He put in a lot of infrastructure. He did a lot of change. He was a cyclist himself. So even though you may be politically opposed to a whole range of figures, it may be that there is a champion you can isolate from that community who is more on board with your ideas. And at the same time, there are several other hooks you can use, as well as obviously appealing to the science and the evidence and the fact that we know what works. The fact that you've just had the Giro d'Italia is one of the biggest sporting events in Italy annually. There are a number of Italian teams in the Giro d'Italia who are not part of the usual race. Every one of those is plastered with logos from small Italian businesses. There are therefore a lot of small Italian businesses you can work with to advocate for cycling. But then again, there may be other businesses that benefit in Italy from other ways of addressing mobility, especially manufacturers of public transport vehicles. So don't just think that there is only one side and one answer. There is a whole range of different things you will need to do to include in your strategy to make sure that it isn't just the usual suspects, loud, lefty people who are making the progressive argument. They will continue to do so, but you can then add on the other weird political allies that all seek one thing, which is a better way of moving around our cities.
Thank you, Fraser. Very good add-on, let's say, to the discussion based on your own experience. We'll talk a little bit more about political shifts and how to onboard different sensitivities in the next panel. Given that it's almost 10:30, I would just like to ask one final question from the audience, if you have. There's two, actually. So, ladies first.
Thank you. It was not a question, it was just a remark of from something, I'm Sabine Jones, sorry, from something that I've seen in some cities. Let's go back to the motivation of the population. We saw a very nice picture of an area with a lot of greenness. We can ask, who is handling this business? Is it the city who is working, sending people to work on it, or do we let the people handle it? because the remark is, I've seen in some cities they have given to people living in apartments a piece of land because they had a land, they have destroyed the building for any reason. And then they decided, okay, let's have the people living there have a small part of the land, and they can grow vegetables, they can grow plants, whatever they want. And they have noticed that they were starting a real cooperation between all the people living there, because they exchange experience, they exchange also some materials or whatever. And then you can change also the motivation of the people. If they tend to go forward towards this kind of experience, then they will hold the project better. I think it's an idea that could be developed to give more power of the people to handle their own environment. It's just an observation that I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
If I may add, there's actually examples on that case. For example, the city of Lisbon, next where I used to live, a group of citizens, they decided to create a small urban, area to grow vegetables, etc. And the city embraced the idea actually and provided them afterwards with sheds to put their tools, to water supply, and inspired the city to create a network of these areas. So sometimes there are grassroots initiatives that are very popular, and they can bring the cities on board. So it doesn't necessarily need to be all the time top down, can also be bottom up. Thanks for your comment.
Can I add maybe just something on that? I think it's important though that the city or the power take some responsibility into it. So for example, pays for what you will need, or helps, what plans should you choose. And if it stops at some point because it was started by a few young people and they have kids and they move outside of the city, and the project, shouldn't die because of that. I think if people leave, so I think it's exactly, I think it should be, I think that the city should still have some responsibility into it and shouldn't say, oh, it dies because people left and because, yeah.
You need to have they control it. Yes, of course. It's what they are doing.
Can I also say something about this?
I always forget to look back and confirm that you have the hand raised. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think that's really an excellent point, and I think that's where creating the policies that give more space back to citizens and to people in the street is important. So when you reduce car use, you can create that space to promote urban agriculture in particular. And I think with the point that was made about trying to about little things leading on to other things, I can't remember how it was said exactly, but there is that clustering effect of once you've started, for example, being more physically active, you start being more careful about your health and have a better diet. So there's when you engage with urban agriculture, you are physically active, but then you think about your diet as well because you're creating your fruits and vegetables, and that's all this leads to thinking more about your health, about sustainability, and social interaction. All these things do add up, and I do think that trying things out like this, things that often are disregarded as, well, this is a tiny impact. Why do you even talk about urban agriculture in the grand scheme of things? Well, actually, I don't agree. I think it's as the speaker just said, the person in the audience, I think those little things is what engages people towards grander things. So I think that's really, really key to do that and think about how you can start engaging people with little things and making them make that progress towards the bigger changes and embracing change.
Thank you. It's like about the big steps, let's say. Last question for Thomas.
Yes, Thomas Lim from Eurocities. I have a question about another environmental hazard that I feel we don't talk enough about it, which is noise. We often talk about climate change, the impact of greenhouse gases emissions, a little bit less about the impacts of air pollutants. And I don't really hear in the media like the impact of noise. I know that the WHO regularly publishes studies on the matter. So in your opinion, do you think that the impact of having quieter cities is undervalued in general, and that we should do something more about this, actually, about raising awareness in this field?
Should I go quickly? Or Audrey, you also, Audrey, you want to go first? Go first, and then I
No,
will.
just go ahead. I mean, yeah, just to say, no, there's really strong evidence of the negative impacts of noise on health, and maybe people are less aware of it. It's true, but I think the evidence is very robust. Not only of the detrimental impact of noise in cities, but also of the benefits of hearing birds. There's growing evidence that actually, hearing birds makes us less stressed out. So there's both sides of the coin, and I think a lot of people, as Francesca said, were very aware of that during COVID as well. But go ahead, and Francesca, you probably have the numbers in your head much more than I do.
Well, about noise, yes, very important impact. And in the urban environment, it is nearly 100% coming from transport activities. We have, I think the European Environmental Agency, they publish some pretty good data. Actually, I have to say, as a WHO, we have WHO guidelines on noise, on ambient noise, and they are for Europe. And you know why they are for Europe and we cannot make them global? Because the rest of the world lacks the evidence and the data for us to say what applies outside of Europe, where we do have data. We have a beautiful directive that also requires, developing noisescapes and developing that. This said, with the noise, it is an underappreciated issue in many cities. Most people end up, living with the problem, but it is a problem because it, together with the air, it's so much of a problem that when we were doing the environmental epidemiology of it, it was very difficult to discriminate the part that comes from noise, in cardiovascular diseases from the effect that it is due to air pollution. In fact, they come together. So in some places, you take the noise as a proxy also of pollution. How much it is important, you can see in the value of properties. The differential, the premium that the people are ready to pay to have a house that is more silent gives you a very powerful indicator of the fact that even if it is not very much spoken, it is valued by people very much. A last point that is about we are very different. It's one of the challenges of noise is that annoyance from noise is not the same as you move around Europe. So in some places, like we are south in the Mediterranean community, we are used to noise much more than you are in the Nordic cities, to the point that for us, too much of silence is creepy. There is something, a bit creepy into that. So, and this is just a little bit to give you a flavor that we have been running just the day before yesterday. We published a new report on disability weights for noise, if you're interested, based on a very large survey across different countries. And that is where you see the differences in perceived annoyance. This said, yes, it is one additional argument for us to use, and of course, shift towards active mobility is something that will an electric mobility, of course, is something that will address that. One of the needs.
Thank you so much. So for now, we are closing the first panel. I want to thank the three speakers today. Really inspiring discussion, and I hope it was also interesting for you. And since we are talking about noise, I would like just to do the transition before we go to the coffee break. I also want to share an experience of this community in Ireland, a small community in Ireland, and how noise actually from traffic is impacting them. So if you have 5-10 minutes, just time to watch the video, and then we can go to the coffee break. But I would like also to ask a round of applause to our speakers, because I think they would say
I live on the main street, so I live on the main thoroughfare. I can tell the time of day by the traffic, by how much build-up there is. So I know when I wake up in the morning, whether it's 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., because I can tell by the traffic that's passing my door. It's very frustrating. I just feel like, you know, this is never ending. There's no getting out of this. There's no getting away from it. One of the measures that we took in our own house was to install actually 2 layers of windows. The outside window was double glazed and the inside window was triple glazed. So I've got 5 layers of glass between me and the noise outside. But also I became involved with tiny towns, and a lot of that now is based around sustainability and biodiversity and how we can help, you know, to improve the sustainability and biodiversity in our own communities at the grassroots level. Initiatives like the litter picking, it brings in everybody. It's easy to do, doesn't take very long. Children can take part. It's fantastic. I feel great about it. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. And you have the best of people, the best people in the world will volunteer with Tidy Towns. Wonderful people. It's all about, you know, act local, think global. So what we do at this grassroots level, that's really what's making the difference. Like if everybody in the world did what we're doing here, you'd have a very big cumulative effect. We tried to run a poetry event on a Saturday morning, but it was a complete disaster because we hadn't mitigated for the noise. We hadn't mitigated for the noise of the traffic. The poor poet was shouting at the top of his voice, couldn't fight over the noise of the traffic. So it was an absolute disaster. It was meant to be for people who were coming to visit the farmers market, that they could listen to a little bit of poetry at the same time. And that was the reason for having it there, but the whole thing just fell asunder. We couldn't continue with it. It almost felt like just complete having to give in, and we were giving in to traffic. During COVID was a wonderful time in the village. There was very little traffic. We were able to sit out the front of our house and speak to our neighbour. We were all sat along, having a glass of wine, enjoying the street. And it was just unbelievable. It was something that I thought I would never witness in my lifetime. To be able to, you know, listen to the birds and to hear what was going on around. It was fantastic. We would comment on how wonderful it was to be able to sit outside and not listen, not have to listen to the constant noise of traffic. This has built up over the last, I'd say probably 25 years. This has built up. We, as people who live in the village, haven't really noticed that increase. It was only when we got an actual traffic count done, where the council actually measured the level of traffic that was going through, that we realized the level that we were at. They were doing that to measure the village for the need for a bypass. So we absolutely and utterly blew the figures out of the water. Those figures became a trigger for me to actually make sure that, first of all, the bypass was in motion. But I was also pointing out, well, it's not just about the number, it's about the effect that the noise is having on our community. If I had one wish for my community and one wish for the future community that's going to live here in Adair, is that they could enjoy this village without having to listen to the large traffic volumes. And policy needs to support that, and the EU policymakers need to help in supporting that. Things like changing the logistical companies, helping them change to transition to electric vehicles, I think that will be one major help. We as a village want to help in the transitioning to carbon neutral by 2050. We are doing our part at local level. We're begging the policymakers to help us do that.
Thank you so much. I think now it's time for the coffee break. Welcome back for the ones that join us for the coffee break. We will resume now the session with the second panel discussion. This is going to be focused on health-driven mobility and bridging the nexus from the cities to the EU level. So a little bit about the high level, but now more about the practical side of things. We are going to have speakers from different backgrounds, and I'm going to invite them now for the stage to join me. I will start with Thomas Lim, Policy Advisor for Mobility and Air Quality at the Network Eurocities. Anna Krajinska from Transport and Environment, where she manages vehicle emissions and air quality. And Peter Di Franceschi, he's the head of the EPHA, Local Governments for Sustainability Organization. Thank you so much for joining me. So what we discussed in the morning is how important it is to have this vision, to have this strategy, this holistic approach on the connections between health and transport policies. We realize that it's not easy, but it's doable. But now from a more practical point of view, I wanted also to hear from you, because you represent cities, you represent local governments, and also other interested stakeholders that are more or less aligning, pushing for the same objectives, maybe doing things a little bit differently from of course, different interests. But I would say that we are very much aligned on what we want to do, but it's not easy to achieve this. So I would like to hear from you, first of all, same for the other session, an initial impact statement on why this topic is important for you, and what you do in your organizations to support the adoption of health and evidence-based policies on the decision maker, let's say from the top EU level to the local governmental level. So I would start with Thomas, and then Anna, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pedro. So I'm Thomas Lim. I work for Eurocities. So we are the network of the largest European cities. We represent more than 200 cities in Europe. So when it comes to healthy cities, one of the main role is to bring the voice of local decision makers to the European level. We know that there are a lot of ambitions at both the local and the EU level, and they have to meet each other at some point. And the role of EU policies in bringing healthier cities and the reality of healthier cities on the ground is key. As far as I'm concerned, I work on mobility and air quality, so two key fields for the improvement of health in our cities. So our ambition and our role and my daily job is also to inspire policymakers at the EU level, so that when they take decisions, for instance, in the field of air quality, they know that what they will vote on and the targets they will adopt are achievable on the ground. So when I tell them that, for instance, by the end of this year in Stockholm, you will have only zero-emission vehicles in the core of the city, this is an evidence that more can be done to improve air quality, and that when the ambition is here, you can actually deliver. Same for Paris. Paris is also working now on its air quality plan. It's a climate, energy, and air quality plan. And Paris has ambition to reduce the level of air pollution to the level recommended by the WHO in 2035. So that's very ambitious. And the strength of our network as well is that we don't only represent cities in Western Europe, but all around Europe. So we're also trying to show them that regardless of your location in Europe, we also have ambitions also, for instance, in cities in central, southern and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, for instance, we don't talk about enough, I think, about the wonderful job that Warsaw is doing to replace, for instance, boilers, which is one of the main sources of air pollution in the city. They have set up a great scheme to replace boilers. I think they have replaced thousands of boilers since 2017, and it has an impact, a great impact on the air that residents in Warsaw breathe. So this is our role, to bring all these nice examples to EU policymakers, because they, at the end of the day, are the ones that take decisions that have a great impact on the health of city dwellers. I was saying that we worked a lot over the past year, actually 2 years, on air quality. So there was a big revision. So let's say the EU framework for air quality was being revised at the moment. So we held actually several discussions with the EU policymakers, and it was hard, I must say, to convince them, even with all these great examples that we bring to the discussion. Especially right now with this, we've all seen this shift in the narrative at the EU, but also at the national level. So there's a bit of, I wouldn't say backlash, but let's say that regarding anything, anything that aims to protect the environment and mitigate climate change, we see that certain politicians tend to lack a bit of courage. So it was a hard battle to fight, to have an EU framework on air quality that really helps cities to achieve their ambition. In some cases, for the cities that lag behind, it's also a great incentive, because if you have the targets at the EU level, it means that you will have to adapt your local policies as well. So we work with 200 cities. They have a different starting point. If you talk to, again, I was mentioning Warsaw, but if you talk to Milan, if you talk to Gothenburg, they are they are miles, a galaxy away in terms of air quality. But here, if you have a common framework, and if you have, let's say, a certain degree of flexibility for us to take into account the local reality, this really helps, as long as you have the same ambition. So our role here is to also make sure that this framework really helps the cities. So air quality is one of the examples, but I mean, I could mention several others. I work also on mobility. So having, for instance, a dedicated EU cycling declaration shows that, what the cities are doing in this ground. We talked about Paris again a lot, but what Brussels is doing is also great in terms of promoting active mobility, and we all know the impact it has on health and the cost of sedentarism. This again shows to the cities that what they're doing is not only something that they do in isolation, and it's also helped the cities to communicate about their measures, showing that this is part of an EU-wide movement, that there's a need to promote active mobility, and that they're part of this development and this trend to improve health and to improve the health of their citizens.
Thank you, Thomas. Quite well. I resonate a lot with what you said, because I'm also part of a network of cities, and it's really important. Like when you talk about grassroots movements from citizens to local governments, also these networks of cities are kind of a grassroots, but from the local level to the EU level, and it's quite inspiring to see. For a small city mayor, it's hard to reach the European institutions, but when you put them together with Paris, with Brussels, with London, with Amsterdam, then their voices are heard. So it's become a whole different beast, let's say. And I'm happy that things are working at some point. Of course, not all battles are won, but at least some of them are. Anna, you want to also add based on your own experience, transport and environment?
Thank you very much, Pedro. Hi, my name is Anna Kujinska. I'm the Vehicle Emissions and Air Quality Manager at T&E. So we're essentially a European organisation. We started working primarily on influencing EU level policies to decarbonise transport, but also reduce their impact on the environment and therefore people's health. So primarily looking at air pollution, but now we're looking more towards a resource efficiency as well. As the nexus of power has shifted away from the EU centre towards member states, and at the local level, we've also started working at the national level as well for our national offices, for example, in Germany and France, and at the more local city level through the Clean Cities campaign as well. And how we work is primarily a cross between a think tank and an advocacy group. So we produce our own studies, but also commission them to consultants with the right expertise to show, for example, how you can deliver a zero emission transport system with minimal impact on the environment. So, for example, we worked heavily on the zero emission standards for cars and trucks to show that they are feasible for not just technically, but also for the economy, for jobs and for people. So now we're moving less away from targets, but making them feasible and making sure that the way that we transition to decarbonisation works for everyone in terms of resource efficiency, cost, and also in terms of the impact on people's health. So one area that is increasingly becoming a big issue across Europe is the growing size of vehicles in the EU fleet. So what we've essentially seen is that in the last 10 years, the average weight of a car has gone up by 200 kilograms. Now, that isn't from electrification. This is before we had any significant share of EVs on the road. This is purely from cars getting bigger and going to SUVs. We were at about 20% SUVs in terms of sales 10 years ago. Now we're at 50. Now, the impact of that, of course, is felt at the national and the city level. What we see is that those cars are getting significantly bigger, not just in terms of weight, but also in terms of width. So they're getting on average 1 centimetre bigger every 2 years. While that doesn't sound very big, the cumulative impact is significant because now around 50% of car sales are bigger than the minimum parking space requirement size, 180 centimetres in Europe. And that means when you go to park one of those vehicles, you either encroach on pedestrian space on the pavement, or you encroach on road space. So either impacting pedestrians and disproportionately those who struggle harder to get around. So people with pushchairs, people with wheelchairs and mobility aids, because they simply do not have the space in some cases to get through on the pavement, or you're pushing cyclists into the path of oncoming vehicles. The weight of those vehicles is also an issue because the heavier the vehicle is, the more pollution it produces from brakes and tyres. So if you increase the weight of a vehicle by 50%, the tyre pollution increases by 75%. And of course that impacts people's health from the air pollution perspective. But also the increase in size and width impacts people's health because when you're crossing the road, I'm actually average size for this part of Europe in terms of height, but I struggle to see from behind parked cars increasingly as I walk down the street. Now imagine the impact on, for example, children when they're trying to safely cross the street. It's very difficult. And that increased weight and height means that when a collision takes place, unfortunately increases the risk of serious injury and it increases the risk of death. So what we need to do something to basically counteract this increasing trend. And we have to do it at all the different levels of government. So at EU level, there's been a complete vacuum when it comes to regulation on the maximum size of cars. There is a maximum limit in terms of the width, but that was only really designed to account for the growing increase in the size of heavy-duty vehicles and buses. It doesn't really work for cars. So we need something there. At the national and the local level, there's potential to do more on taxation, for example, based on weight and parking charges, like what Paris has enacted and other cities as well. But to really tackle these kind of trends in mobility that are going in the wrong direction and aren't going to help us decarbonize, aren't going to help us improve air quality, and are going to make the transition to e-mobility more difficult in terms of resource efficiency, we need to work at every level of government together to effectively push car manufacturers to make smaller vehicles, and also, as importantly, create that demand for smaller vehicles again and make the growing larger SUV size vehicles no longer cool and practical to have in cities. Thank you. That's all from me for now.
Thank you, Anna. I give the floor also to.
Thank you. So Pedro, you asked why health is important for me and my organization. I would say that I'm more and more convinced that health is the single most powerful, most simple and less divisive way to communicate what I do and why I do it. When you ask my family, I've been working for more than 15 years for EPHA, which is a network of cities and regions focusing on urban sustainability in Europe and globally. I think when you ask my family, they would say, well, Peter works something with cities, something green, something sustainable, something, well, something there, you know. And I feel eventually if we communicate and we say what we do is because it's of my health and your health and the boys' health, the children's health, the health of the district, of the neighborhood, the health of the air, the water, when you breathe, the health when you go somewhere, the mental health of feeling good and happy. I think this is a different way of communicating it. I myself, I run in EPHA beyond the Brussels office, also the Global Food Program. So in Europe, we have a petition, and which also was inspired in a way by WHO. I'm an expert on procurement, public procurement and food procurement, and particularly school meals procurement. And when I read from the WHO, the regional report, I think it came out a few years ago in March, that 1 in 3 children is obese, and child obesity is really fast growing, particularly in countries where you wouldn't expect it, like Italy. We did a petition saying actually every child in every school should have a healthy meal and food education. And some months ago, we did also a bigger event. And for me, it was important to have members of the European Parliament from all parties, because health shouldn't be a topic of that is green or socialist or, you know, only those politicians driving a bicycle. It should be really, so it was important for me. And eventually we had politicians from all different parties saying the same sentence, you know, it's about the children, it's about health, because these are topics that are not right, left, liberal or green. And especially thinking about these EU elections, we need to be, the narrative must be much stronger. I think we have the evidence, we have all these facts, but still it doesn't get true. We know the unhealthy have only one wish, you know, that's what we always say. And how come we don't get that true? Because it's not divisive. How can you, it's difficult to opine and say something against something which is healthy or not for the children. So I think youth in this discussion, I think is very important, especially when it comes to promoting health through transport and mobility. because nowadays many young people don't, it's not like so cool to have a car or necessarily a driving license. It's more like to be mobile with the car, the scooter or the bike, or to move around. Still, I think being in Brussels, I find it in terms of traffic one of the most stressed cities that I know. I've driven cars from Turkey to Napoli, I don't know, but I was feeling in Turkey and in Brussels, everyone is more stressed. You know, my son now at 11 started to take a bike with helmet. I'm stressed every day. You know, 3 days ago, he said a car almost touched him. I feel like how can, and you know, it's very loud, it's noisy, it's stressful, especially Fridays afternoon. So this is, but on the other hand, my other daughter, she inspired me a lot. You know, she would say, okay, that I see you on the computer working on urban sustainability, but outside it's full of cars. It's outside, it's not trees. So that triggered, for instance, in my case, the Brussels capital region is one of our members. And since I knew at the time the minister Pascal Smet, I wrote him, okay, in all our schools where my children are, there is no security. There is no, when you pick up the child, there is nothing to put the bike. And now I see in many schools there is it, you know. So it's like, in that sense, I think youth is inspiring. Another important topic is for me multi-level governance. I think cities alone do not manage it, mayors alone not. It needs really embedded in a regional, in a national, because whether it's nature, energy, transport, logistics, it needs the different levels, food, and so on, in order to plan it well. You see it alone in Brussels, many streets are part of the region and not to the city. So it's sometimes really confusing when you say, okay, why this rondel cross point is not done better, you know, between pedestrians and so on. Then they say, no, this is not us, it's not the municipality, this is the region, you know. So it's this is important. Another point for me, it's important to really see it from a cross-cutting point. So it's not just, health is not just, as we know, it's not just about transport, it's also about what you eat, the physical activity. And as you said, physical activity and better food reduces your non-communicable diseases by 80%. So I think that means also that from a mayor perspective, a local government perspective, what I hope is that in the future, mayors and local governments have more regulatory power to do something for health, because they're responsible for health. But if you think about it, as a mayor, you cannot do so much. Okay, you can reduce the traffic. And even that, there's the example, for instance, in Italy from Bologna, where the interior minister said, Bologna mayor, how do you dare to reduce the traffic, to limit it to 50 kilometers per hour, you know, or less. I'm glad they did it in Brussels. But then in other polluters, like for instance, pesticides, I know of examples where they got in a lot of legal troubles because of reducing pesticides in and around the cities. You have another example, for instance, a mayor, when you want less junk food, you know, in the city, it's difficult to say, okay, around schools, I don't want, you know, I want access to good food, not just, you know, I don't want food desserts where you cannot find an apple or a pear. I want this to be attractive. It's really difficult because they say, well, it's a choice. So mayors and local governments need also more regulatory power and competence to do that. And finally, I think what I would like to see more is then to an approach which is more a One Health approach. I think that is very important, and especially after COVID, that how to combine the different dimensions, the human health, with the animal health, with the environmental health, and cities are a good dimension for that. We work a lot with the mayor in Finland, for instance, Lahti. They are very interested to work together. They have, for instance, a healthy forest, which was for me interesting, because I come from a region in the Alps in Italy, so forests are everywhere. But I think it was also a marketing thing, but it's interesting how they use then the forest for the people, also for mental health. You know, there is now the social prescribing, where the doctor doesn't tell you, okay, take a lot of medicines, but tells you, okay, meet some people, go in the woods, you know, get exposed to nature, because the more biodiverse nature you get exposed, the more biodiverse is your microbiotical composition in your guts. So there is a lot to be still discovered, but a lot to be done. And I think One Health is a good approach, because it's a cross-cutting approach. and the narrative needs to be better. But and especially nowadays in this political divisive climate, I think health is an important way to communicate what we do.
Thank you so much. Really inspiring statements from the three of you. Something that I want to go back a little bit because Anna, you mentioned the vehicles getting bigger and bigger, heavier and heavier, so that means they're also more expensive. And the three of you mentioned the vulnerable groups like the children, but also we have to think about social justice and inequality. So when we look at the most affected by pollution and noise, usually are the more economically vulnerable, or the groups like children and the elderly. So how can we bring more justice into this transition? And how can we address the social inequalities of pollution and how these are reflected in the public health? I know this is a tough question, but if you can, and it's for the three of you, if you want to.
So maybe since I'm holding the microphone, I'll answer first. I think it's really important that we consider the view and the unique struggles of marginalised groups within policy making at all levels of government when it comes to changing transport policies and building a more sustainable transport system. So we have to build the impact on those groups into the impact assessments when we're looking at the impact that future policy options might have. We also have to add KPIs and specific goals for those communities within the policies that we are developing. And we have to make sure that whatever policies we are developing, they don't just benefit the middle classes and the wealthy, but they benefit everyone in society. So a really great example of a policy that's bringing affordable e-mobility to lower income people is the social leasing scheme in France. So that basically allows people on lower incomes to rent a battery electric vehicle for around €100 a month, which is really great because it makes BEVs affordable for those on lower incomes. But crucially, it also provides an incentive, if the scheme is designed correctly, for car makers to produce more affordable, smaller and compact cars, because within those schemes you can set criteria as the funder. Let's say it's the national government, or another source of funding could be the European Social Climate Fund, administered at the national level, of course. You can set criteria saying, yes, we will provide funding to lower incomes for these vehicles, but the vehicles can only, let's say, be A to C's in size and not SUVs. And you can also make sure that those vehicles are affordable and minimize the cost by reducing, for example, the trim level. So there's not unnecessary options in the vehicle, which increase costs. So that's super important. But of course, private transport should be a last resort. So we also need to ensure that we are incentivizing shared and active mobility for everyone in cities as a priority, and where we can't shift private journeys to public, only then do we have right-sized zero-emission vehicles. So we also need to look at making public transport affordable for all, and how most effectively to subsidise public transport for those who can't currently afford it. Implementation of shared mobility hubs in areas that are poorly served by public transport should absolutely be a priority to get people onto public and shared mobility that currently don't have realistic access to it. You know, no one is going to give up a car journey that takes 15 minutes if they have to travel by public transport for an hour and a half. That's just not realistic. And we also need to have credible subsidy schemes for people to give up their vehicles and shift to active mobility. So, for example, bike purchase schemes, and those need to be adapted to everyone. So we also have to have accessible bike options for those that are not fully able.
Thank you, Anna. I don't know if Thomas or Peter want to add something.
Just to complement what Anna just said, I think the first step would be also the way you communicate with these vulnerable groups. You probably don't communicate the same way with someone living in a wealthy neighborhood and to someone that living in a underprivileged neighborhood. So I think that would be the first step I would mention. Otherwise, you may risk backlash. And so I know I have a personal connection with Poland, and there, for instance, the narrative around electric vehicles is that they will become so expensive that it's basically like a mode of transport that will be used by the rich people, whereas the poorer part of the population will have to rely on public transport. So we have to avoid this narrative. And we have to communicate. Well, there's a famous sentence, which is the greatest country in the world is where the rich people. I think it's not exactly this, but where the rich people take public transport. This is where we should land in the end. So there are a couple of great initiatives conducted by cities. For instance, Barcelona funds citizen labs. So. The concept is that they go to, like, the municipality creates the lab in a neighborhood. They invite all the citizens of the neighborhood to reflect on the impact, well, on the impact of transport on their health, for instance, but not only, and the need for biodiversity also in the neighborhood. And they actually co-create actually solutions to improve the health of the residents in this neighborhood. And so this is a way really to tailor, well, your communication, but also to tailor the solutions to the kind of population you're talking with. So I think this is key. And then, yeah, we also, when it comes to tailor solution, we also have to think about how you accompany the low income household also, or not only low income household, but people with special needs. For instance, it's about making sure that the nurse or the person working in a factory starting a night shift has access to, for instance, an on-demand shuttle. This is something that is that exists. In cities in Italy, for instance, they organize such a service, and it's about also making sure that when you have to use your car but you need to enter a low emission zone, you get incentives to replace your vehicle, or that you have or that you open a new bus line to make it easier to access the center. So I think this is really, and even more in the current context where we had energy crisis, COVID crisis, etc., inflation, that people feel that they're accompanied, that they know about the solution. So probably cities have to make extra efforts to reach out to these people. We talked a lot about Brussels. Brussels is a great example of how things went with, for instance, the low traffic neighborhood part of the Good Move plan. There was probably a lack of communication in some cases, and we know that in certain neighborhoods and municipalities it backlashed, whereas in other municipalities it went rather well. So we probably have to tailor again the solutions to address and to accompany this part of the population.
Thank you, Thomas. I totally agree. It's for Brussels, it's indeed trying to skip the message from we are going to gentrify, because people see that we are going to gentrify your area. That's the problem, I think, for some of the backlash. So indeed, I totally agree with you. The message needs to be right, and it's more positive. Peter.
Yeah, just quickly, because also what you said, Anna, made me think of a friend. He works on renewable energy, so let's say a green guy. And he told me he bought a big Tesla. So apart from the resources, I didn't think, like, indeed, if the heavier the car, the more microplastic pollution and so on. But it's really true that people, they're still thinking, okay, my next car should it be an electric one or rather a hybrid one? Now that the, I don't know, Euro 5 is finishing, or Euro 6 next year. But it's not so much about the thinking, okay, how can I reduce the need of a car, right? It's I was very surprised, and I just wanted to tell that story. Recently, I was in a reception, and there was this high-ranking soldier, you know, and so we had a drink. So there was this man, muscular and all, you know, and talking, and then we talked about cars, and then he said, Russell, he used Cambio, you know, the car sharing. I was really surprised because, you know, it's totally not the stereotype that you would think that, let's say, a colonel would take a car sharing. You would rather think a Range Rover, you know, dark. So I felt like what some of you said before, you know, sometimes it's like really the representative, because you always have labels on who takes the car sharing, who does this, who does that. And I feel to break this. So I asked him, how are you happy with car sharing? He said, yes, I take my children to school. I take it several a day. It's perfect. I'm so happy. I don't have the car. I have to think about all the payments and so on. So I think that was a good story, because we as well, you know, when we share our stories, it's usually, yeah, people from one club, let's call it like this, or one church. So maybe this is also a good idea.
It reminds me of a funny story. So usually upper middle class, they don't like to take the bus. But if you kind of reshape it, you call it BRT, and you put it on a dedicated canal, it's more like a metro, and then people start using it. It's funny, this psychological effect on nudging. And I see also in Europe, it's funny, but it's true. And another thing that comes from what you said, it's indeed we need to make sure that this transition is beneficial to all the citizens. There's a recent, so the European Alternative Fuels Observatory recently did a survey for EV drivers on Europe. And basically the typical EV driver is a white, middle-aged man with higher education and above higher than average income. So it's a white rich boys club at the moment. So we need to kind of democratize this transition, even if it's not just providing, of course, cars for everyone, because that's not the interest of cities, but to make sure that this is not just a few people that are benefiting from this. And there's a local, but also this is very much from EU policy point of view. So cities there, they are doing a lot, but there's so much that they can do. And speaking of EU policy, because you mentioned some Euro 7, and there's also the Interquality Directive. So there's this year, there's CO2 standards. So this year was quite intense in terms of policy for clean air, for zero emission mobility. I want to ask this to Anna, but of course, feel free to step in. Do you feel that the current policy and framework conditions that are stemming from the EU level are enough to safeguard people's health and lifestyle?
So I think when we look at the new AAQD air quality guidelines, I think they're a step in the right direction. They're definitely better what we had before, but they're still not where we need to be, because they don't align with what the WHO guidelines said we need to protect people's health. So in terms of that, we can, of course, be doing better. And at the local level, cities should push to go zero emission by 2030, to enable the right framework for all the follow-up policies that happen, to ensure this fast, quick transition to a pollution-free environment where we can really safeguard people's health at the local level. Unfortunately, when it comes to the enabling regulation, we had the Euro 7 bus and truck emission standards being finalised this year. And unfortunately, especially when it comes to cars, those are very weak. So we can't, we can't expect much reduction in terms of pollution from those tailpipe pollution standards, which basically just means that we need to double down our efforts to shift to public transport, to active transport, and where we can't do that, to electrify that road transport as quickly as possible, because having newer internal combustion engine vehicles isn't going to deliver the air quality improvements that we really desperately need now, and of course not the greenhouse gas emission savings we need to protect people's health from the impacts of climate change. So I think there's still a long way for us to go, but we have made progress. I think especially since the Dieselgate scandal, now it's much more apparent, people are much more aware that air pollution is very much a big risk and transport plays a big part of it.
Thank you. And indeed, when finger pointing starts at the planning, of course, the cities will be in the line. But speaking of cities, I don't know, maybe tomorrow first and then we.
I would say it's okay as long as the framework stands. We will, well, we have seen, as I was saying, a tendency, a trend in EU politics at the moment to put into question previously agreed milestones. The ban on the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles is one of them, but I think importantly, it set a precedent. So we hope that part of the next mandate will be about implementation, but also from the perspective of cities, because we hear lots of noise from the industry, automotive industry, but not only, saying we need now to focus on implementation. I would say we also need to focus on implementation from the side of cities, which means how are we going to help cities to achieve the targets that are set in the environmental air quality targets? How are we going to help the cities that have committed to reach climate neutrality by 2030 in 6 years? So that's not a long time. How are we going to help them to improve the health of their inhabitants? So we hope that when it comes to available EU funding, we have big discussions on budget, not the next mandate. There will be a fair share for cities to improve their transport infrastructure, for instance, to also dedicate additional efforts to cities that are lagging behind, to help cities to experiment. So meaning that it would be great if we could have more research and projects, also to help cities to experiment, test and try, make errors, and also improve their solutions. So having targets is nice, but we probably also need to focus on the way we deliver on the targets and to make sure that we stay on track.
Thank you.
Yeah, indeed, following up on what Thomas said, we recently had a meeting with the Commission and they told us the next multi-annual financial framework, right, where the big discussion about where the money will go. This will come out by the end of, in the second half of next year. It's going to be very difficult because if the elections go the way they go, all these topics, let's say, here also to this discussion, whether it's environment and climate, they are much less present or less pressing. I think in that sense, health is a good way to keep the pressure, because I hear already, especially also as a network of cities, that there are voices saying about what is this in Europe? You drive through Europe with a car. In one city it's 30, then it's 5, 50, and 60. Who the hell do you think that those mayors are, that each of them, so therefore it's also important, as I said, this multi-level governance. Here the EU, the national government, the local governments need to work together. So it's, it's about health, it's about less injuries on the streets and so on. And yes, it should be a normal situation, right, to slow down in cities and to have certain standards. And it should need to be that cities, need to have different speed limits and so on, because I wouldn't understand why there should be such a difference. But surely it is clear that there's another wind coming from another side.
But what you said is really true. So there's the European policy, but if there's no money, if there's no political support, what happens is that the cities are left alone doing their own thing. Sometimes coherently, sometimes not. Also see that with the low emission zones. So Brussels has rules for the low emission zones, and then we have the Flemish low emission zones in Antwerp and Ghent, for example. Then the Wallonian region also has different criteria. So it's confusing for the driver, and especially if you go cross border, even more confusing. So I think it's a great point that you put here, enabling conditions from the different level of governance, because then cities are just left alone. So then I'll give the floor to you. Just a quick remark.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, because Tom already touched on it, on the CO2 targets for cars and their importance. So we've heard a lot in the media in recent weeks that there's a lot of political parties across Europe that want to roll back the targets in 2025, roll back the 2035 phase out date. But this would really be an error, because the only thing that's pushing car makers to deliver zero emission models onto the market is these targets at the moment. And the only way that we're going to bring down the price of these EVs and get smaller affordable models on the market that car makers need to sell in the future to basically attract the mass market to e-mobility, because we've seen this with the current stagnation, there's only so many premium BEVs that the market in Europe can take. We really need those standards to stay firm and give car manufacturers and the wider industry the financial security, the investment security to put investments into Europe and produce those cars. If we don't get this supply of EVs because we roll back the targets, this is going to impact all of our work at the national and the local level as well, because it will be incredibly difficult, I presume here, for cities and local authorities to go zero emission if there's no supply of BEVs on the market. And that's something that I've already heard sometimes being said in Poland, is that they would like to go quicker, but there's not as much supply of EVs there. The wait times are longer than in Western Europe. That was at least the case last year. So we really need that EU level legislation to provide that supply that we need to decarbonize.
Thank you. And I say it's the same for buses, for cities that want to do it. First, thank you.
Yeah, just in terms of transition, I think we should be aware of two facts. The first fact is, the first fact is that 2 weeks ago in the news, all the population heard electric cars can't be repaired. You buy a car, when you have to fix it, it can't be repaired. So nowadays they have the information which is against what is your policy at the moment. And so I have a question, how do you want to I would say to refrain from this bad communication? Maybe the policy would be that cities are investing themselves in these cars and they rent them, and then they can handle all the technical issues themselves. The other fact is something totally different, but it has a connection. I've been living in Asia, and China is very well known to have a lot of pollution, to have a lot of traffic, and at the same time they can be very modern. So all the scooters, they have to be electrical. You can't find any more scooters which are not electrical. But there is another thing that we have to handle before, because it's also very dangerous. When you have too much noise, it's dangerous, but when you don't have any noise coming from an electrical device, and I can tell you, you walk on the pavement, you have a lot of scooters going one side to another one with no rules. It's a lot of stress, it's a lot of danger, it's a lot of accidents. So we have to be conscious on these facts to prepare a good transition. But now it's what the pollution had in the news 2 weeks ago, which is very important. We have to do a new communication, because nowadays private people won't invest in electric cars with this news. So it's a question, how do you want to handle this? Thank you.
So I'd say one question about misinformation and the other question about electromobility and road safety. Feel free to
So maybe firstly on misinformation, so that this is something that we're working on actively, and something that we're going to be addressing publicly in the next few weeks coming up to the election. And it is a massive issue across social media and print media as well. I think where there has been really a void is in national governments, where they have provided subsidies to EVs and to charging, which is fantastic, but they failed to provide funding for information campaigns for citizens to dispel the rumours around electro mobility. I think there is a great potential for member states to take action at this level as well. The UK, for example, had an information campaign for a while, dispelling rumours about EVs, but the funding was cut and that has stopped. I think there is potential to really refill this void.
Yeah, and maybe about the second part, we know that it's having different modes of transport coexisting together in the cities is something that we have to take into account, and that there is still a lot of education that has to be done when it comes to how you coexist. We've seen cities going for instance, for well, a dedicated infrastructure for each kind of mode of transport. We've also seen, or because I was wondering whether were you referring to e-scooters or scooters, mopeds?
Any kind.
Any kind. You can.
Something which is not electric.
Yeah. So I think it's probably will be part of the communication campaign that should be run. Electric vehicles produce much less noise, even though they still have a noise when they run at a low speed. So this should be probably part of the communication campaign that should be organized. But so I would say, yeah, there will be probably time to adjust for people. It's as with every transition, probably this was the same when you probably went from trailers to to cars. Yeah, cars run faster than horses, so you probably have to pay attention also.
If I may add for this, probably we have to go to creative technological solutions. So vehicles having like you mentioned, the Zoe has this buzzing sound, but we really don't want to replace internal combustion engine sounds with this buzzing sounds thousands of cars in Europe, because then we are creating another problem. Because it's quite annoying if this is in a very large scale. So probably we'll have to think about different ways to communicate with vulnerable citizens. So people which are deaf, people that are blind, they need to be aware of the vehicle presence, probably with technological solutions that do not require substituting one annoying sound with another annoying sound. Let's hope that the industry is actually up to this. Smart vehicle. It's okay. Then I'll give the floor to Pierre, because we have the question.
Thank you. Thomas, you mentioned these citizens labs in Barcelona. I didn't know about them. Are they? So it's about sustainable mobility, right? Did they come up with good ideas, interesting ideas? So from citizens, I'm interested in that.
That's a tricky question. So they do not, as far as I know, they do not only address mobility. It's more about how you change the neighborhoods in the broader sense. So how you put more greenery to improve the health of the inhabitants, to limit the impact of heat waves. So they came up with, as far as I know, new circulation plan. So that was co-created with the help of the inhabitants. So it's really to avoid the top-down approach that we often see, and to really consult citizens from the very start. I can send you the link if you're interested in what they're doing. And I feel that, I mean, we've seen the Citizens Lab are a great tool to raise awareness. So it's actually feeds two birds with one seed. Let's put it this way. We don't want to kill the birds. So because it really informed the citizens, and it also allow them to take a bigger part in how we redesign cities and how we take into account well, health, and also communicate on the benefits to have a better health also at the neighborhood level.
There's one question.
I would like to ask you a practical question. As you know, we are in war in several parts of the world. Don't you think that this is a risk towards your objectives? So I think that you are in war. When you produce weapons, you pollute. So you want to reach your targets, CO, climate change and so on. It's unfortunately the case. Another question is also the impact. Of course, thank you for all you say is true in an ideal world, but concretely, for instance, you talk about the cars, and you are right, of course. But if I take the case of my son is a coach, a sport coach. If he had no car, he would have no work because he's paid per hour, and it is 7 days on 7 days. He's not at all someone who earns a lot of money. He's 33 years old. If he has no car, he has no work. So
I can first start maybe for the for the part related to the war. So at Eurocities, we actually work with Ukrainian cities, because Ukrainian cities are part of our network. And I can tell you, regardless of the situation, they're really keen on learning from other cities how to rebuild the cities in a more sustainable way. So whenever we organize workshops with the Ukrainian cities, there is a lot of interest. We know the situation is not well. It's difficult. They have probably a lot of unexpected events that will come in the way of their ambition, but there's still a willingness to learn and to improve the sustainability of the cities. So we'll see where it goes, but I can tell you there's still a willingness. And of course, I mean, as all the crises, there are, well, I don't want to diminish the horrible impact of any crisis, but there are also opportunities in a way. We saw it with COVID. We talked about the impact of COVID on mobility. And the window, I mean, it opened a kind of window for people as well to have a chance to look at things differently. And for the war, this is also for the Ukrainians. Also, they see another opportunity here, even though we know how the situation is today.
maybe I can also add here, we're a European-based organisation. We have about 60 members across Europe, and some of those are in Ukraine. So we work very closely with them. We've also now started a program looking how you can reconstruct Ukraine in a more sustainable way when it comes to transport, so you don't make the same mistakes that were made before. We also worked really actively over the last few years to push the EU to, for example, put a price cap and put an embargo on Russian oil to make sure that we're not funding the war in Ukraine, as well as advocating for all the various demand reduction options that there are in road transport as well, so we can reduce our consumption and also directly reduce the amount that we're spending to fund that conflict.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have to add much. I mean, we also have 10 city members in Ukraine, but in principle, you're right. I mean, war destroys everything. So it's an environmental disaster, and that's it. And about your son, I fully agree. Obviously, if he needs the car, you know, if there are no other options, that's how play around which one would have to assess what is possible. And individually, I'm not sure. So I cannot say much smart things around that.
And if I may also, in many situations, I have never seen a city that said, I don't want any or zero car in the city. So most of the cities' ambitions are about reducing the share of cars, and for those that can use another mode of transport to use this one, so that the people that really need it, like your son, have probably less traffic on the road, less congestion, so they probably can also arrive earlier at this destination. So it's really about addressing this share of the population that can have an alternative and make it available for the greater part of the population. But it's
to explain, it's because it's paid per hour. So you understand?
yeah. So imagine he's not happy. Yeah, I can repeat what she said. She said that her son is paid per hour. I guess he's not happy with the level of congestion we're seeing today in Brussels.
Yeah, indeed, we can say cities want less cars, smaller cars fit for city purposes, let's say. But of course, it's not one size fits all, and some people will still have to use private car.
So of course it as well depends how far your son has to travel. That's not the same everywhere, but for example, I recently heard of a plumbing and repair service in London that has now shifted from vans to cargo bikes, because they actually found that they can get to their destination and to their clients faster. So they've actually been able to increase their revenue because they're not spending as much time stuck in traffic jams. But of course, that's very much dependent on how far you have to travel, and there's always the balance. So of course, we will always probably have some level of private mobility within cities for those that can't. But that should, at some point, over the next couple of years, increasingly shift towards a more sustainable, decarbonised option.
Cannot agree more. And looking at the hour, I think, do we have time for one more question, or we have to finalize? Okay, Fraser is just giving the sign. Apologies if you didn't manage to ask all of your questions. We could continue here for at least one other hour, but unfortunately we'll have to finalize. I would like to thank the speakers for this panel, and then another big round of applause, because it was a good. We kind of agreed, putting together the session before the break and the session after the break, that there's already evidence being collected of the benefits, including of policies in mobility policies. The number of the data is growing, so it's not a secret anymore. But there's still some things to be done from the policy level, but also to support the local level in implementing. So this connection of the health policies with the transport and mobility policies. I hope that for the next years, politically wide, there isn't too much of a seismic shift that will make us track back a lot on what we achieved so far. But let's see. Hoping to vote on the 9th.
Between 6 and 9.
So let's see if we can do our part also and send the right message to our policymakers. Thank you so much for this. Now I get the floor to the finalize the session.
Right. I have a little list I've made in myself so that I don't actually forget people, because it's very important. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank all of our speakers here today, all given a different insight, a different contribution, equally valid, but it's together all of those reasons that we need to move, we need to have progress. From One Health, from rewilding urban spaces that we live within nature, all the way through to technical improvements on transport and mobility, to local government solutions, to the reason why air quality is so important, the reason why health is so important, and the scientific understanding of what the problem is. So all of our speakers together have given us a great understanding of what is needed and how we might achieve it as well. We haven't just focused on what the problem is, but also on what we might like to do for solutions. I'd also like to thank you for being here, but also the people online. We haven't really made a lot of this, but there are a lot more people actually listening to us online as a webinar. So thank everybody who's joined us here today. I would especially like to thank the special representative we have from the future generation, which Francesca thoughtfully brought with her, little Leonardo, and a reminder of how important progress on these issues is, not just because he represents the future, but because he has needs now. He needs his city to be safe, he needs his city to be healthy for him now. So it's not just this is the future generation, but this is the needs that we have now. Also like to thank Pedro for ably chairing our session and facilitating our discussions today. Obviously, we have to thank the people who funded this event, our funders, both the European Climate Foundation and the European Commission for providing the funds for hosting this event. And then finally, I'd like to thank the team that put all of this together. And sometimes, despite the best efforts of the venue to block the technical demands that we made weeks in advance with multiple emails and a site visit, and still have enormous technical problems for them to deliver today. Those members of the team include a staff member who's no longer with us, who's left our organisation, Louise, who many of you may know, who helped set up the event, came forward with the idea. So we thank her greatly. But also Tom and Bridget, who've been the sort of running around helper at the front desk. Isla, who's at the back, who's also been part of the team, bringing things together and also collating the materials. But also Bhavani, who you won't know and haven't seen, but she's online and doing a lot of the social media posts. So we thank her, and Emmy, who was the project manager, to bring everything together. We also have other contributions from across the team. Lisa, who's in the room with us, but Tom, who's also nodding like a little so everybody across the team has really helped try to pull this together. We thank them enormously. The only thing that remains for me to do is to leave you with a thought. And the thought is, one of the things that has been mentioned a couple of times is how vociferous the opponents are against what we're trying to achieve. And how recently it's become part of a culture. It's been part of the new populist, very right-wing agenda to try and undermine the progress that we're seeking to make. And I see that actually as progress. I don't see that as a problem. It's a quote that I will leave you with, which is wrongly attributed to Gandhi. It actually was first made by a UK trade unionist in 1911. And the quote is, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you quit." So that's the thought I will leave you with today. Thank you very much. Lunch is now being served. It's on the first floor and it will be served and available until 1:15. And I hope we can all have some really great discussions whilst we're down there. Thank you very much.
Later, someone should do thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf
It's again, my sauce is great, but yeah. I provide the